Hello and welcome to my presentation of Materializing the Immaterial, Provotyping to explore voice-assistant complexities. My name is Mike Shorter and I'll be representing my other authors Bettina Minder, John Rogers, Matthias Baldoff, Aurelio Tedisco, Sabina Junginger, Aysen Aitak and Patricia Wolf. Before we get started, I'd just like to give a quick overview of the project that this is part of. So this is part of a project called VA Pepper, which stands for Voice Assistants, People, Experiences, Practices and Routines. And we conduct research into how people experience voice assistants in their homes and private lives and how they develop new practices and routines around the use of voice assistants. So to give a bit of background into this paper, I'm just going to give a very quick overview of some related work that we thought was relevant to our research here. To begin with, we did an overview of speculation and immaterial voices. So here we start to explore the complex concepts of the ownership of our voice and what does it mean when this starts to be collected by digital objects. We explored the intelligence of voice assistants and how the form of these things is very different to the capabilities of voice assistants. We explored designing for invisible technology and how by making invisible data physical, we can start to create more connections between the users and their data that they're generating. And then finally, provotyping as a research tool. So here we start to explore the idea of provocative prototypes that instead of refine the design process, they more expand it. Rather than answering questions, we're starting to ask questions through prototypes. So we started the development of these prototypes. One of the things that we found from the previous research that we conducted in this project, which consisted of an in-home study and some network analysis, is that a lot of the users' practices or routines were not necessarily changing that much, but instead there was lots of questions and unknowns around voice assistants. So we felt that prototyping was a suitable method for starting to explore these unknowns. So we started by getting some of the team together to develop some prototype ideas. So here we started by going into our research that we already conducted, creating a series of 6 smaller briefs. And then from these briefs, we generated about 100 ideas of prototypes and then started to refine and select these ideas to finally get us to 12 finished prototypes. And these prototypes all manifested in lots of different ways, from physical digital objects through to apps, through to pieces of print, through to videos conveying a particular experience. So I'm just going to quickly show you 4 of the prototypes that would necessarily not be conveyed that well through the paper because they rely on some video. The first one here, the top left one, is a printer that understands absolutely everything that it can hear and prints it out on this receipt roll, starting to ask questions of the capabilities of the microphone. What can it hear? What does it think it's hearing? The bottom left one here, I'll just let the video play.
Hi, Aurelio. Here's my confession for today. Today I gave personal data to Google, and I also recorded several of your conversations. Do you want to know which conversations?
So here we're starting to explore what would it mean if we could interrogate our voice assistants by putting it in a confessional box. The next video along.
Hey Google, bring me in a spiritual environment.
Sure, I'll take you to a new reality.
I didn't understand.
Hey Google, is it real?
So here we're starting to explore what it would mean if our voice assistant could have emotional intelligence to support us in different ways than it can now. And then finally, this top one is an app that's starting to explore what would it mean if we knew the value of our data that was being collected and where it was going. So once we had these 12 prototypes, we put them in front of the wider team and ran a series of 2 prototype workshops where we just put the prototypes in front of the team and asked some very simple questions. What does this provoke? Who does this provoke? Where does this provoke? And when does this provoke? And from there, just allow quite organic conversations to happen around these prototypes. And then from here, we could start to evaluate these workshops. And this consisted of coding all the various comments and post-its that we generated through the workshops, as well as ongoing conversations that we're having and email exchanges that we're having following on from the workshop. And from here, we managed to uncover 3 new themes that were otherwise not detected through the more traditional research that we already conducted through the project. And these 3 themes were the complexity of AI smartness, the complexity of the relationship between the form and the cloud, and the complexity of our relationship with data. So the complexity of AI and smartness, here we started to unpack that there is no scale of intelligence. There is no test that we can put our voice assistants through to understand how smart is it. And the conversation initially went in, what would it be like if our voice assistants could have an IQ value? But then we later kept on discussing this and realized that smartness isn't a one-dimensional thing like an IQ test. There's many different dimensions to smartness and intelligence here. And we started to unpack that a little bit. The next complexity that was uncovered was the relationship between form and the cloud. So voice assistants currently look like smart speakers, when really the speaker isn't the smart bits of the speaker. The microphone and the AI backend and cloud computing is the smart bit there, but the affordances of the device don't necessarily suggest that. We can't really look at this thing and understand what it is capable of. So we started to think about what would it mean if we could reimagine the form to allow us to give more control and transparency over these devices. And then finally, there was the complexity of our relationship with our data. So here we delved back into the privacy paradox, where a lot of our participants from our initial research studies all shared concerns of what was happening with their data, but when they had a voice assistant, they maybe weren't necessarily that bothered by it due to the fact that they're unsure of what is happening with their data, what is actually being collected. There's a lack of education there. And we also started to think about the implications of our data. When you ask your voice assistant for something simple like play a song, what's actually happening with that data? Who's getting their hands on that data? Is it being sold? Or is it actually just going to nowhere? And then finally, we started to think about the different cultural affordances of data, where one culture's data might mean something entirely different to another culture. So I'm just going to go some quick notes on prototyping as a method. So because we're working in this interdisciplinary team, design thinking was maybe not that commonplace in a lot of the spaces that people were working in. And we felt that this prototyping helped people move away from a very problem solution space and much more towards a what if space. And in this what if space, we could start to be quite creative and build narratives around these prototypes. Not too dissimilar to the way science fiction authors would build narratives around bits of far-fetched technology. And from these narratives, we could start to understand the landscape and when and how these objects could exist and what would need to change for the world to change in that direction. We also found that a lot of the other disciplines were maybe used to research experiments that were clean and controlled, where the prototypes very much felt like controlled mess, a controlled mess that we felt really added to our research, that almost embraced the same messiness in the relationship that we have with these AI objects in our homes. So I'll just summarize quickly now, where current VAs are a physical conduit to vast online services powered by immaterial artificial intelligence, the sum of which is perhaps impossible to fully grasp by any one researcher or any one consumer. By using prototypes with an interdisciplinary academic research team, we hope to have provided elements of graspability in the multiple layers of complexities that voice assistants present to both consumers and researchers in order to strengthen ways in which we can speculate on their future. We've also defined considerations that designers of voice assistants and their systems should acknowledge in order to improve on the human experience of voice assistants. There remains a clear need for designers of interactive systems to be able to have the design and human languages to be able to navigate the future of voice assistants in ever more trustable and secure, but also playful and meaningful ways. Thank you for listening. If you want to find out some more information on this, please have a look at our paper or visit this website.